Hello and welcome to this edition of Talking Europe and to the Netherlands. Well, the result of the Dutch election was greeted with a sigh of relief across much of Europe as the anti-EU, anti-immigration, anti-Islam right-wing party of Geert Wilders did not become the biggest party in Parliament, as many polls had suggested on the run-up to this vote. That poll position was maintained by the centre-right VVD party of Prime Minister Mark Rutte. However, it did lose a number of seats. The big question here now is what kind of coalition can be formed, as the Dutch vote was really quite widely spread. People are also wondering that while he will not be part of the next government, is Wilders really out of the picture? We're going to meet with some Dutch politicians to find out. Well, we start with a very recently former MP for the centre-right VVD, the party of Prime Minister Mark Rutte, Mr. Anais. Thanks for your time. Of course, you've just finished up your time in Parliament, but your party, the VVD, has retained its standing as the largest party. However, it has lost seats in these latest general elections, while the far-right Geert Wilders did gain.
The VVD is now 22% of the voters in Holland. And you have to think about that. 22% is the largest party in the country. And the second party is PVV from Geert Wilders with a little bit more than 13%. Then we have two parties. They each have 12.5%. So without PVV, because no one wants to govern with him, we still don't have, with three parties, a majority in Parliament.
So the next coalition is going to be very hard and very difficult to find a stable government.
Absolutely. It will take months, I fear, because left people can be asked to join the government, but that will be difficult because of their program. So it is unstable. It's unstable. But on the other hand, you can say PVV did not grow further than 13%, and that is very important for Holland, but also for Europe, to my opinion.
So Geert Wilders, 13%, won't be part of the next government, but nonetheless he is having, if you like, power in Dutch politics. A lot of people saying that the centre-right parties are being pulled further to the right in order to respond. We're hearing more policies for curbs on immigration. Mark Rutte launched his campaign saying act normal or leave the country.
Absolutely, but nevertheless it is absolutely clear to me that people in Holland don't want an exit. And that's a clear message from the voter. Only 13% of Holland
on EU membership
says leave the EU. So that's an interesting result, isn't it? Yeah, and furthermore, of course, Geert Wilders, he is becoming more and more radical. I was present in a debate in September when he took the pledge to forbid the Quran, and even said that police should go into houses to check if there are Qurans in the houses. Well, that is an impossible thing. But anyway, it is what he pledged for. So he's becoming more and more radical. That's one. Second is he dodged the debate. He wasn't at the debates. People don't like that kind of arrogance, to my opinion. But nevertheless, he has 20 seats. That is 13% in Holland. It is 13% nevertheless. But it is completely something else than that he should take over the majority or have a very large party which really radically change Holland, and that did not happen.
So yeah, the political landscape for the future more or less the same here in the Netherlands?
But more difficult, even more difficult.
Mr. Anais, thanks so much for your time. Well, we're going to head back now into the city centre of The Hague to meet with one MEP from the D66 Liberal Party that seems to have done better than it has done in many years in these latest general elections. Well, we're now with Ms. Sophie in 't Veld of the D66 and MEP for the Netherlands. D66 really doing better than they have done in the last 2 decades in these general elections. Why?
Why? Because we are, we have a very clear, progressive, liberal, pro-European message, and we've kept that message throughout. We've been, we went against the flow, so people started to trust us. And I also think there's a whole part of the electorate, a growing part of the electorate, young people, who feel, but of course, we are pro-European. Of course, we have a progressive agenda. Of course, we're liberal Democrats with a small L. So, in a way, you could say we even, we have the future, because I think my party did extremely well, D66. The Greens did extremely well, and our electorate is not identical, but very similar. Young people looking at the future, so sign of hope.
Pro-EU, your party is, but it does want to see reform in the EU nonetheless.
It wants to see reform, far-reaching reform, because we are pro-European. I mean, we are still essentially working with the structures that were designed for the 60s. For 6 countries that were working together on coal and steel. Now we have 28 member states, more than 500 million citizens, and we are working together on the most sensitive, delicate issues. Of course, we need reform if we want to keep the EU sustainable also for the future.
Of course, the one man, the party that was campaigning on that anti-EU stance, wanting to put it to a referendum, wanting the Netherlands to opt out, was Geert Wilders and his Party for Freedom. He did nonetheless take 13% of the vote. So is there not a shift nonetheless in the Dutch public against the EU? Is that what his main attraction is?
I think all around the European Union you see people are sceptical, and it has to do with 2 things. One is actually unrelated to the European Union. It has to do with all the big shifts, the big developments in the world, and people are very, very insecure. We see the same in the United States, and they focus their fears on the EU. The other thing is, of course, that the EU for decades, let's say for half a century, was built by civil servants and diplomats behind closed doors, and that was fine for those decades. But now the EU is becoming political. So in a sense, the fact that people are taking ownership, even if they're grumpy, I mean, there's still a very firm majority that wants to stay in the European Union. But the EU has to adapt to the 21st century and the requirements of parliamentary democracy.
Of course, a very high turnout in these general elections in the Netherlands. A lot of people I spoke to voting said, well, after the election of Donald Trump in the United States, after the Brexit vote, they really felt that it was very important to get out there and vote. And a lot of people really felt that they were voting not just for the Netherlands, but for Europe, with other major elections, presidential polls in France, parliamentary ones set in Germany in September. Somewhat of a sigh of relief in a lot of those countries once the results fell here. Do you think this is laying the path for the elections to come?
We're not out of the woods yet, because even if Mr. Wilders did not get his big election victory, his political discourse has been adopted by some of the other parties as well. And we have to respond to that. But at the same time, I see a kind of European spring. If we look at the election of Alexander von der Bellen, the president of Austria, now we see D66 and the Greens making big strides ahead with a very pro-European agenda. And if we look at France, I have very, very good hopes that Mr. Macron will be the next president of France and not Mrs. Le Pen. And in particular, as she's putting things on the spot, by saying, if you elect me, then you're going to have a referendum to leave the European Union. I think the vast majority of French people do not want to leave the European Union. They may grumble, but they don't want to leave. They want things to change.
We're going to have to wait then and see if the French follow in those Dutch footsteps. But you mentioned there the Groene Links, the Green Left Party here in the Netherlands. It did very well in these general elections, quadrupling its seats in Parliament. We're going to find out why with one of its MEPs. Okay, so we're now with Bas Eickhout of the Groene Links, the Green Left Party. Mr. Eickhout, done better than ever before, the Green Left in these general elections. Why do you think? What was the reason behind that success?
I think what we did all the campaign was a positive message. And I think there's a lot of scaremongering going on in this campaign, about the Dutch culture, that it's under threat and all that. And we from the start have been saying, guys, we also want change. But we want a positive change. We want an open society. We are built on that. And I think that open attitude, that open way of campaigning was very much rewarded.
It seems like you're nearly one of the only parties, are you not, out of the 28 that is open towards immigration, that has that very much open door policy. Are you really unique in that way?
There are a couple of other parties, but it is true that what you see is that the entire political movement is more to the right and more to defense of our Dutch culture, as if that's a fixed identity. And we're saying, guys, culture and your identity changes over the years and is changing by people, by new people. And I think that open attitude, we are becoming a sole voice, maybe, but I think by doing that, you also attract a lot of voters. And I think people appreciate, if you're not going along with what all the politicians are saying, what they think that people want to hear. I think people want to hear honest politicians, and that's what we did.
And how much do you think the success is down to the new leader? I believe he took over in May 2015, Jesse Klaver, who's 30 years of age, the youngest leader, I believe, of a political party in the Netherlands ever, has Moroccan origins. How much do you think he was a factor in that?
I think, of course, he was a big factor in that, because he himself, like you said, with a Moroccan father, he was himself showing that, culture is diverse and has an open attitude. But of course, he's young, he's new, and he's very talented. The way he speaks, it's really brilliant. So, and for example, we did town hall meetings where 5,000 of people came to listen to a politician, which is pretty unique in the Netherlands. And of those 5,000, 2/3 were under 30 and not member of the party. So we really got new people interested in politics again, and Jesse Klaver was certainly key to that.
And of course, one thing that really stands out of this Dutch vote is the spread of the vote across a number of parties. So figuring out the next coalition in that government is going to be a tricky one. What are the chances that the Groene Links will be part of the next government?
Well, that remains to be seen, but it's going to be difficult because we will probably need 4 parties at least to form a government. We've never had that many. Well, we had in the 70s maybe, but really a long time ago. So it's going to be very difficult. And clearly the biggest party is of the current Prime Minister Rutte. And he's a very classic liberal politician, very far with its economic agenda, very far away from us Greens. So in that sense, it's going to be tough and it's going to be long. And we are only going into a government if we really can achieve a green program, but also a more just and honest social program. We are called Green Left, and that needs to be visualized in a new accord.
Indeed, the Groene Links is quite different from Green parties elsewhere across the EU, formed from a coalition of 4 different parties. It really is unique in that way. It's not just an environmental party.
No, we're not. We've never been. That's why the name is Green Left. I think, by the way, most of the Green parties in Europe are, of course, more left-oriented. But for us, it has always been clear, you are green and you are left, and that goes hand in hand. And for example, on taxation, that means you tax more what is polluting and you tax less what you want, and that's labor. You want employment, and these kind of changes is always green and left hand in hand.
Now, of course, a massive increase for the Groene Links in these elections. But overall, where do you think the Netherlands is going? It looks from the outside that it's still very much a right-wing country. And that won't change.
It is a right-wing country, unfortunately, way too right-wing for me. But I think what is important is that we very much showed also that the populism of Wilders can be stopped. And I think this is really the Trump effect, where people were saying, everyone voting on Wilders, they always said, well, I don't necessarily agree with him, but it's a signal that we want some change. And I think Trump showed that if you vote on a populist, it's not only a symbol, in the end he's also going to act on it. And I think that scared of a lot of people, and there we could offer, of course, an alternative, a more positive-oriented alternative.
Mr. Eickhout, thanks for your insights. Well, we're going to go to one very final short interview now. We're going to meet with the leader of a party that started just a few months ago. And finally, we're going to meet with the leader of one of the newest parties here in the Netherlands, Mr. Thierry Baudet. You're the party for the FVD, the Forum for Democracy. You took 2 seats in the parliament.
Isn't that exciting?
With a party that started just 6 months ago, quite exceptional. Why do you think people backed you, given that you're so new to the political arena?
Because we are the only ones that formulate a credible alternative to the current politics of more immigration and more EU. The people feel that their voice is not being heard, and we have a program that's based on referenda, so direct influence of the people on political affairs, and a lot of people are up for that.
And you really feel that immigration, it was a big issue in these elections, but immigration needs to be stopped to the Netherlands? Is it really that big an issue?
Yes,
Why?
absolutely. We have a terrible integration problem. We saw it last week. The weekend there were riots of Turkish Dutch men, sometimes 3rd generation immigrants, and still they feel primarily Turkish rather than Dutch. So we have a huge integration problem, and we're only making it bigger by allowing unprecedented numbers of immigrants from the Islamic world into our country. We should stop that.
from the Islamic world, or in general we should stop?
Well, I mean, Islamic immigrants are far more complicated to integrate than others. They cause problems. So we should stop making the problem bigger.
Because with a name like Thierry Baudet, I imagine your family doesn't have uniquely Dutch origins.
That's right, and we are not against immigration in general. We're not xenophobic. We're not against people that are coming here to enrich our society. That's not the point. But we see that there's a huge problem primarily with Islamic immigration, and so we need to stop that and first work out the problems we have here today.
And when it comes to the refugee issue, is that separate for you? Do you think the Netherlands needs to take?
We are against taking any more refugees. We think we've taken enough, and we should support them in the region and not bring them here.
And of course, you are one of the parties that would like it to at least hold a referendum on Dutch membership of the EU.
Oh yes, we are totally against the European Union. We want to leave the European Union. We are in favor of the unconditional surrender of the European Union.
And how do you feel then Geert Wilders, who is also the very vocal, candidate against the EU, he didn't do as well as respected. So overall, it seems that it's pro-EU parties that won the vast majority of the votes here in the Netherlands.
Yeah, that is testament to the fact that our education system and our press need to be improved as well, isn't it?
Well, that brings us to the end of this edition of Talking Europe and indeed our visit to The Hague. But join us after the news when we'll be having a discussion about Turkey-EU relations. See you then.